the second session. And thank you for sharing your words, discussions, online and physically on the wall here. Our second session is about dance pedagogy from a socio-political perspective. So we are trying to build up and interweave the topic as we go throughout the day. And already, I should say, socio-political perspectives and not perspective, because our two speakers have different perspectives, approaches, and even fields of work, which falls into this big area of pedagogy. We will start with Nina, Patrizi, Hänel, for contemporary dance at the University for Music and Dance, Cologne, Germany, and also a contemporary dance artist. Welcome, Nina.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you for inviting me to today's conference. In my title that you see in the program has this word, the unspeakable word of vermittelten Teilen. I try to break it down to take it out of a linear understanding in German, because vermitteln in German means like I'm addressing something to you. So I was trying to play with variations of a crisscross dynamic I call it crisscross dynamic, and this will emerge throughout my speaking. When I got the request from you, I was a bit overwhelmed with the theme of dance and racism, and I thought I can't contribute. I don't have much embodied and discursive knowledge. Then I kept on thinking, what can I contribute before saying no? And I thought I would like to take this context I'm working in. It's a context of dance in higher education, as said, with a focus on transmission, and to elaborate on that, on my perspectives on that. So in my contributions, I will mainly speak from a praxeological perspective and will focus on artistic laboratory settings and on educational settings working with students that develop their own praxis in transmission processes in Tanzvermittlung at the Center for Contemporary Dance. Either performative practice or transmission processes after the first 2 years of studying is not meant to separate them into roles or professions such as the dancer and the Tanzvermittler in. It rather intends to support a further development of each student's own artistic praxis through the lens of one or the other focus. Developing one's own praxis of transmission is therefore closely linked to the development of one's own artistic praxis. So I therefore will navigate between both settings, artistic laboratory and educational settings, and share my observations, questions, as well as some concepts and practical examples that keep me researching, questioning what I'm doing. Looking at artistic processes within the field of contemporary dance, whether it's a project in schools, a professional or some other context, processes of knowledge, practice and method making can be seen as experiential, diverse, highly reflective and research-based. In order to empower the situatedness of such knowledge production, artistic processes are often organized as collaborative arrangements in which participants at hand negotiate modalities of perspectives, positionings, and expertise. Reflecting about those laboratory settings through the lens of transmission processes, its medial spaces, its in-between spaces of transmitting can be brought into foreground. Whether it's by analyzing methods, formats, or practices, or differentiating specific modes, atmospheres, or attitudes as aspects of a praxis of transmission, in these collaborative arrangements, multi-perspectiveness is taking place. Multi-perspectiveness, as I use it, allows a non-linear crisscross dynamic of negotiating and transmitting. Different than in a linear idea of transmitting that is, for example, unfolding into explain, to introduce, or to make understandable, and in this sense ascribed creation need from me right now? From which perspective can I contribute? Who has not been heard until now? Whose competence might be of relevance in this moment, and so on. In listening to the needs and situatedness, awareness can be raised towards one's own ever-changing perspective one contributes from. Instead of acting from ascribed roles such as the teacher, the student, the choreographer, the dancer, or the professional or the non-professional, in crisscross dynamics of transmission, one can go beyond an ascribed role which is different from denying its existence in order to access those micro-actions of contributing as a creator in one moment and in another one as an initiator. In another as a participant or a supporter, an observer from the edges, or a witness in close contact, and so on. This has a reciprocal effect on one's self-engaging, which can range from encouraging, elaborating, making accessible, giving space, questioning, and many more. And I'm referring here to a concept, Continuum von Aktivitätsniveaus, by the sociologist Stefan Hirschauer from his article Verhalten, Handeln, Interagieren, Behaving, Acting, Interacting, in which he's taking a very differentiated look onto the micro-actions and their ever-changing intensities within group processes. Having been focusing on transmission processes by taking a closer look on the structural aspects, I will shift towards one's own inner or introspective modalities of perceiving and reflecting while transmitting. To do so, I will refer to concepts of embodiment and somatically informed approaches. Diverse inner methodologies, somatically informed concepts aim towards an embodied whole that is in constant process of transformation throughout life. In this sense, engaging with it on a daily basis is a process of self-encountering and self-alienation, of knowing and not knowing. It provokes embodied aha moments as much as it provokes turbulences and confusions. Different than an analytical approach of reflection, a somatically informed way meets information in a mode of immediacy. This can shed light onto the vital process of how one perceives and experience-based knowledge is produced. John Walwood, an American psychotherapist who has done in-depth research on relating concepts and practices of Western and Eastern philosophy in the field of psychology and spirituality, differentiates between conceptual and phenomenological reflection and reflection as a witness. For Walwood, conceptual reflection opens a process of deeper understanding by reflecting on our experience, by thinking about it, using theories and terms, or analyzing what is happening. This approach enables to step out of our pre-reflective immersion in experience so that we can see it in a new light or from a new perspective. Walwood understands a phenomenological approach to reflection as aiming to put aside familiar conceptual assumptions in order to explore experience without a preconceived notion of strategies. Phenomenological approaches in this sense view experience as a complex, living process that cannot be precisely controlled or predicted. To understand reflection as a witness, Walwood draws from spiritual practices and philosophy where one is simply attentive to the ongoing flow, regardless of the particular contents of the experience that arise. In this approach, distance between observer and observed is narrowed even more, insofar as there is no interest in influencing the stream of consciousness in any way, to understanding, unfolding, articulating, or moving in the direction of relaxation or resolution. A similar approach is formulated by Martin Buber in differentiating between observing, looking on, and becoming aware in German. Beobachten, betrachten und innewerden. The theologian and philosopher focuses on qualities of one's own seeing and how that shapes the in-between space of relating. While the observer for Buber is wholly intent on fixing the observed man in his mind and noting him, he's still going to write up as many traits as possible. The onlooker is not at all intent. He takes up the position which lets him see the object freely and undisturbed awaits what will be presented to him. For Buber, a state of becoming aware is emerging when in a receptive hour of my personal life a man meets me about whom there is something which I cannot grasp in any objective way at all, that says something to me. It is not he who says it to me, but it says it. What Buber and Well would draw on specifically, whether it is myself being in the position of perceiving, or being perceived, or perceiving situations where participants perceive each other in a specific way, all of those modulations of how to perceive do affect the way of reflecting and vice versa. This shapes in-between spaces, relating spaces, and in that sense affects how one can, wants, feels invited or not invited, provoked, forced, or empowered to position him or herself or to engage in a specific way. In my contributions, my intention was to take a closer look onto transmission processes as a crisscross dynamic against the background of laboratory settings. An attentive as much as a critical and discursive, and empathetic as much as a constantly self-contextualizing presence of the self is needed to navigate and engage progressively and constructively within the complexities of those settings. In this sense, a praxis of transmission processes can be a field where diversity of experience-based knowledge production transforms from embodying it towards transmitting from, about, and through it within diverse social and political contexts. To let diversity or multi-perspectiveness to be revealed allows existing interdependency to be recognized and brings into foreground, and here I'm quoting Donna Haraway, whose passion and research focuses on feminist epistemology, cultural studies, cultural theory, and bioscience, that the self is partial in all its guises, never finished, whole, simply there and original. It is always constructed and stitched together imperfectly, and therefore able to join with another, to see together without claiming to be another. I will close my presentation by sharing students' responses on the question, what kind of mindsets, tools, or practices would you like to contribute for engaging in working collaboratively? Those students have been participating in a 2-week project in March 2020. We had to stop it after the first week. The project CONFAB aims to elaborate potentials of crisscross dynamics of transmission processes within laboratory settings. We have it for several years now, and we're constantly redesigning it because of the complexity of creating a space that has flexible structures to elaborate those spaces. It's a project for about 15 students who enter the platform with a question or proposal of their own artistic praxis. Each year, an artistic duo or collective is invited for the first week. The agreed frame for all is to go beyond the role of guest artist and students and stay present within the situatedness and consciously explore the many options to elaborate each other's artistic praxis through various methods, using questions, scores, forms of presentations, and others. During the second week, Students work collaboratively with the support of mentors to further develop the gathered materials and conceptualize a participatory, performative evening-length format that is open to the public. And now I would be to see the photos taken right before the lockdown. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Nina, for your contribution and also for reminding us of our post-its and the texts. I think somehow the responses are interweaving. And also I want to say that with your initiative to kind of construct a master's degree course, there is also a lot of possibility for new changes within the academic vision. I witnessed that, and how to create critical discourse and really integrate many things that were kept out of the academic discourse or segregated, and also to try and bring in this mutuality in the process of sharing knowledge, not teaching. I feel somehow I would dream that throughout the day today, we will be able also to connect our practices together and maybe create something, extend the dialogue, keep the topics with us, and not just end the day today. So our next speaker, of course, Livia Patrizi. She's the artistic director of Tanz Berlin and the initiator of Tanz Komplizen in 2015. Until the beginning of 2019, she was part of the research and material development team of Kunstlabor Tanz, from which the digital dance tool for schools, Calypso, emerged. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you everybody for being here today. And I changed the role from the moderation to the speaker, and thank you for this trust, which made me quite stressed also because English is not my favorite language, let's say it like this. So I will have to read quite a bit to feel comfortable with it. The word diversity has always been suspect to me. Why does the cultural field needs a word to make people aware that there are different kinds of humans with different perception and different ways of working and making art together? I grew up since the very beginning of my life in a family which I always call my extended family. Today, you would describe it as diverse, probably. It was a vast range of different aged people with different cultural and social backgrounds. They had different able bodies, spoke different languages, and had different life challenges. Italian foreigners, teachers, factory workers, artists, students, philosophers, illiterate poets, blind painters, unemployed activists, straight, gay, or everything in between, like some of our Neapolitan transvestite friends. They all came into our house to drink coffee or wine, a lot of both, to speak about life and to work together on different socio-political projects. For example, a neighborhood school for socially deprived kids who didn't go to school at the time, or to write together the first book of the new organized unemployed movement. They were fighting with, and not only for, the mentally ill people, the crazy one, for the Franco-Basaglia reform of the psychiatric system. We hosted several times people escaping from the dictatorship of Chile or Argentina. Migration in general was a big topic, but not only from country to country, but also the South-North racist issues within Italy itself. I went to kindergarten and school classes where I was sometimes the only kid who could speak Italian. And I did my best to speak Neapolitan with the right pronunciation, because I wanted to be, of course, like my other classmates. When I was 8 years old, I tried to draw a picture of a young man who had just been burned alive by right-wing extremists at a gasoline station. But drawing was never my thing. My father taught me a lot of anarchistic songs, many very sad, others very combative. I loved to sing, but I was a disaster at it. So when dance came, I was then about 11 years old, there was not 1 second of doubt. I needed to dance, since it gave me a medium to elaborate the complex, beautiful, but also terrible world around me, and finally express myself and speak out. I went to the course of ballet, which I actually loved. Sorry, Nora. And then I came to Germany and met the word of Pina, which I loved even more. I never believed in one style, in one dance credo. Contemporary dance can also be a corset, excluding certain aesthetics and labeling codes and ways of working as more or less contemporary according to the actual trends. When I shifted my working field from dancing myself to the dance transmission field of Tanz and later Tanzkomplizen, I brought together all I experienced in life and art in one vision. I loved to dance, but I really missed a more concrete political and social act within it. Probably I missed the diversity of people of my extended family and their non-ideological way to act within concrete and common purposes, always bringing together very different people, perspectives, and form of knowledge. When we look at the dance pedagogy field in Germany, we are facing today a big amount of knowledge collected by private dance centers, dance in school, community dance, pre-academic and academic dance departments. The question is there a common goal when it comes to discourses about diversity, inclusion, racism, accessibility? Or are we rather contributing instead to build a circle of missing opportunities? Why would that be so, if everybody talks more or less about the same topics? The skills and abilities that you need to transmit dance in school setting are very specific. You will meet different topics than one you know. You will get back different dance material, either issued from different dance forms, like urban or traditional dances, or free from the corset of a specific dance aesthetic, and free also from the constricted judgment about it. As a teaching artist, you will also witness different forms of social, very often intersectional discrimination, which are intrinsically part of the German school system and of our society. You work with the whole population range. At our performances at the end of the school year, you see right away from which cultural habitus the kids come from as soon as they reach the stage. Their body and the way they move is a public denunciation of their social condition. Raising their head up is a complete different act from one kid to another. For some, it's just a physical one. For the others, it is a reverse of the circumstances, and therefore a political act. As a teaching artist, this means to face a set of social, political, transmission, and artistic challenges, rather than the concern to establish an academic discipline. At the same time, most of our artists are issued from academic studies. So, where do you learn to teach dance in school, and what form of dance education do you need for it? Let's look at privileges. Despite its history of resistance against an elitist concept of art since the German Enlightenment, the so-called cultural education context, kulturelle Bildung, has its own challenges when it comes to discrimination matters. It has nowadays become part of the system. Privileges that arise from this working field are not equally redistributed like everywhere else. Critique of discrimination always means, above all, to take a reflexive, critical look at ourselves. While talking about hierarchies in the education system, we also reproduce it. Most of general directors of dance education department are men. In cultural educational projects, you find many more women. So, high education for the gentlemen and kids for the ladies. There are very few directors with a diverse background in university dance department in Germany, or as far as I could research it, no people of color, for example, or other who are publicly generally othered. I also perceive a self-made separation between the different dance education fields. We have similar topics, but we often share knowledge in between the single categories. Where and how can we generate a transfer of knowledge between dance in school, for example, and university context beside isolated cases? There is also a more or less hidden internal fight about resources. Since the field of cultural education got a lot of funding from the federal and local governments in the last decade, it was often perceived as a threat in the professional dance world. This encouraged a sort of war of the poor against the poorest, which contributes to enforce prejudice. Community dance artists complains about the elitist politics of the contemporary dance scene because they happen to work every day with a lot of people which are alienated from state and democracy because they lack all opportunities for advancement. On the other side, the community dance field is perceived as a threat for the freedom of art, since educational and social tasks should not be tasks of cultural policy. Quote, Coalition de Freie Szene Berlin, the coalition of the free scene in Berlin. So we have, as an example, the following paradox. Our teaching artist in school works with many disabled kids who would love to continue to dance at the end of their school time, on one side. On the other side, national founded dance programs for diversity, which have a hard time finding disabled dance artists in Berlin. The bridge in between is missing. Sigrid Gareis writes in a recent published article in the Tanz magazine, in difficult times, it will be a good idea to use body knowledge to develop not only aesthetic, but also political language, which could also be used to cope with the diverse global crisis. She questions the structures of dance institutions and asks further, to what extent do our dance institutions reflect our social reality? Which canon do we represent? What employment relationship have we set up? How do we deal with resources? The dance transmission and educational field is a crucial key in order to reach more equality because it is working with the future of dance, and this is after tomorrow. We need to work continuously at the interface between all forms of dance education, connecting the field and the institutions. Looking at canon, methods, structures, we have to ask ourselves, who is us? Looking at the society of our time, the us has to expand. Our dance family has to expand. It is necessary to involve in co-research process knowledge which has been and is still minorized. All the missing bridges, the gaps to be filled, this should not only be the work of people who are biographically connected in different ways with the topic of diversity. It is the power structures that have to change and act decisively. So to finish with the word of Nora, let's implicate ourselves in a transformation process toward a common and radical goal of transcending a history of divide and discrimination. And actually I have a concrete proposal, and I look at Michael Freund from Dachverband. What about initiating a national conference about dance education in Germany with the topic of racism, also with the topic of diversity, and invite all the education field to look at which singular field, which contribution each field gives to this topic, and then to look what is missing, and especially to look what do we need in between? What are the gaps to be filled? What can we learn from each other? So not always the academic field and the dance school field, and then the other field and the other field, brings those fields together. And maybe it would be a good starting point to have a conference, and then to have a paper with to-dos or with tasks, you know, and to come out of it with some actions, you know. So that was it. Thank you.
You immediately jumped into action, and I'm so burning for this. And of course, I think 2 questions remain. Maybe you would like to respond to them. Is, besides creating the conference, what actions could be taken to create like a long-term, stable, sustainable, I would say, activism in the dance field or in the performing arts field? What actions need to be taken so that we do not stop at the conference and we do not stop at policy level, because sometimes at policy level things change in the wording, but they do not change in reality. So I feel there is a need to create a sustainable action network, form of activism. I don't know how, but this is what I'm throwing on the table. And also in order to connect the whole circle, the community dance with the academic circle, with performance, with school, with production, with funding. What are your suggestions? Anything?
Well, I think it would be already good to connect the educational field, and the educational field is also connected to the performing field. Yeah. And of course, it's about connection with everybody, but I think to start with, already in the educational field or in the performance field, there is not enough intersectionality. You know, for example, I mean, the first step we did when we made these interviews, as Amelie pointed out, was to invite Nora to conceive the conference, and then we were thinking about how can we transpose the questions we are raising here today to a production, to a dance production, stage production, and the topic of racism, and then we quickly left the field of contemporary dance. So we now choose the Crump choreographer, which is going to do a piece with Crump dancers. He said it's the first time that a choreographer did an audition, a Crump choreographer of Crump dancers. Normally you take, you know, the Crump dancer into contemporary dance pieces, you know. And because this art form, which is an urban art form, it's an embodiment of discrimination. And they don't want to be reduced to this today. This dance form, which rose in the 90s in LA with the racial protest, developed. It's a known aesthetical practice, you know. So of course they don't dance only against racism. You know? They dance because they love it, because they want to share, because they have something to say. But the movement vocabulary was made out of what Zwazi was saying before. The first reaction is the body. Racism is a body experience first, and also empathy. You know? So Crump is talking about both topics in this dance, is incorporating. So it is for us much more close now to this urgency than contemporary dance form that I know. You know? So I think we can learn from them. And it's good to give the space completely and not to try to incorporate it into contemporary dance aesthetics or frame. So of course it's not going to be the same aesthetic as we know, you know, but they want to do it, they want to bring it on stage, they have something to say, and they have something to say physically about the effect of racism on the body. But they also have something to say, they also have an answer to it, you know. So they have both, and so that was, for example, a thing we decided for the performing field to leave the contemporary dance field and to say, okay, let's see, you know, what's happening elsewhere. And we are not the one who owns the dance or the truth, or yeah.
This is already quite also very political action. Although it is artistic as you describe, but it is political action as well.
Yeah, it's like what Mai was saying. Also, this is a dance form which also needs to survive, to have to be commercialized, but they also need the space to develop. It's an aesthetic practice, so it also has to go further. And, yeah.
Maybe I can contribute from. It was mentioned a lot today. I mean, seeing also the gaps that you described, Livia, that or let's say the separated fields. I would propose in myself, but also that comes a lot from students, from a generation that is about 20, 25, 30, to look at one's own self-contextualization, that having become the way we are, and related to that to privilege, to a differentiated look onto your own privilege, to step back from yourself in a way. And that's one thing. The other thing is maybe talking about the MA program that we are conceptualizing, and having a lot of people having been involved on looking on the modules, the structure, and giving feedback and reconceptualizing. So it's a very long process. I really like it. I really love it to have many people looking at it. We decided to try it with a structure where there is a lot of space of choosing your own focus, eigene Schwerpunkte setzen. So there are parts of modules that you have to do, but there's also a big part where you choose from, and to kind of work on elaborating more where transmission processes or Tanzvermittlung is happening. So a part is in the kulturelle Bildung, but there is another part in artistic research, and there is another part in more a global context, and there's another part in interdisciplinarity or training concepts. So there is a lot of transmission processes happening, and how can we differentiate that? And so the students actually choosing their focus enable a diversity, because each will choose another focus and relating other focuses towards each other. So, and also seeing that, to kind of shape a space for context of transmission processes, but also looking on transmission processes as a resource with all that has been said, no? With the discourses, with the practices, with the having become the way the one person is and the other one is different, to reflect all of that together, and therefore to also deeply go into collaboration and collective approaches to what does it mean to share the space with very different perspectives, and how can we learn from each other, so that so I feel there's a lot of also what you mentioned with the activism. There's a lot of coming from the young generation, and especially that the time now we are living in. So there's a lot to learn from them, and how they, and also being an institution that is built on a specific understanding of education that has to transform itself. But it doesn't go from one day to the other. It's like the image that stayed for me with the first session is it's a long process of cracking. And then you go 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and 2 forward, and it's a long process of cracking. So far.
So, just my last, you maybe don't want to respond to it. What does it take, or how many years we need to work until we can have Raqs, for instance, Raqs Sharqi, in a curriculum, in an academic course, or in an MA course, or it will never happen? Like also Cramp will never happen probably, or it's possible? When or how?
Maybe I can give an example that we had right now, that we had an applicant for the BA that he was from urban dance, and he was full of passion and desire to move and dance and to speak through dancing. And then we came up with our categories. Can he go through the full day of training and what, So, and that's the process we are in. So to kind of feel that actually we are there, we are in an institutional field that has grown in that what it is, that also in education has this kind of training thing going on and a specific categories working with it. And on the other hand, also to question a lot why we are dancing and what dance, what dance can contribute to society, and what can not only dance but the moving and the embodied body, the cracking open of the body. So, and that are two polarities that are very, very strong, I feel. I can't say in years, but I have in my mind I have some plan of, okay, what are the next steps to who could be in cooperation with that to kind of change step by step, and to also, especially in this in the transmission process, definitely different than in the BA dance program, because in transmission processes is already a field that is about working with what each of the students brings, so and rather than going through a canon of contemporary dance training, so but to more reflect on the own history and how the own history relates to contexts of fields, and there it's much more able to invite that and to change it also from there into other contexts.
Now, so we are about to close the session. I just want to say, I'm in this part of the session, and I want to say that also my interest in Raqs Sharqi or in Kramp is not just for those specific categories, but because besides being street dance or Arab or Turkish dance, or how they label it, I don't know, but they are in reality political dances. And it's about also bringing this political body on stage, which we will discuss maybe later in the next session. And how much there is segregation towards bringing those political experiences, who are also choreographic experiences and aesthetic experiences, on stage. Yes. Now? Of course.
Yeah. I would start with adding, for example, I would start with adding Aktionstanz to the curriculum, for example, of all dance schools, because dance is politic, and it is, like for myself, it took me so many years to reach there and to discover that area, and I would be like so thankful if I have learned that at school, so it would spare me so many years of searching and exploring by myself. So this is a thing that I was really missing, and dance is politic and can be, and it should be. So this is like one very concrete and direct suggestion. Another two suggestions is to put like a quota for foreign teachers who are not white, not from Europe, and also for students. And I know, I'm Syrian, I know with the whole situation in the Arabic Spring, there are a lot of wonderful artists who would love to come, who would love to teach, and there are a lot of wonderful students who would also love the opportunity to be part of a school here. So like really to put a quota, as now we are doing it with the all feminist woman stuff. Okay, start with the quota. I studied 4 years in Frankfurt. All the teachers, and we had a lot of guest teachers, really like 90% of them they were teaching almost the same. And I was missing a lot, really. So this could be like 3 suggestions which I have very concrete to do at schools. Aktionskunst, I mean, like Aktionskunst, like the whole thing between art and politics, and yeah.
So
I don't know the word for it actually in English. I just know it as a German thing.
Thank you, May, for your suggestions. This was May Safan, yeah? Am I pronouncing the name correctly?
In Arabic, Saifan.
Saifan, May Saifan, because I speak Arabic, I should say it correctly. And she will be also among our speakers in the 3rd session. And I would like again to thank Nina and Livia and invite you to share your thoughts, your practice-based input maybe, your responses like we did in the last session, as Amélie described it so well. And for the online viewers, I think you can move to the next link with the Padlet. And I will just leave the floor now. Thank you.